Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Wattsburg Area School District, where we are student-centered and future-focused for a world-class education. The October 21st, 2024 regular board meeting is now called to order. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Brummagem.
Present.
Mrs. Burlingham. Mrs. Hetherington. Mrs. Lee. Here. Mr. Morvay.
Here.
Dr. Pushcheck.
Here.
Mr. Williams.
Here.
Mr. Young. Mr. Blazer.
Present. Thank you. I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda and addendum.
So move, Pushcheck.
Nicole, second.
Are there any discussion or revisions to tonight's agenda and addendum? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Hold on. We did have one adjustment, Dr. Rowley?
Yes, I believe we'd like to add a name to one of the blanks in personnel under appointment.
So it's section 9H for the maintenance class A. The name for that is Ryan Bem. RYANBEM. And that will be effective November 5th.
Any other adjustments?
I think that's all.
Okay.
Mr.
So
President, this is in accordance with our new laws for publishing agendas. We're okay.
Yes, I think we're okay with our 24-hour notice.
Yes,
for the
yeah,
public?
because it
We're adding-
was posted that we would recommend a hire tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Revoting on the item. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? The motion carries. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes for the September 16th, 2024 regular board meeting and the October 14th, 2024 work session.
Morvay, so moved.
Nicole, second.
Any discussion or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carried. The minutes are approved. The chair recognizes Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Ken Berlin, for school reports.
This evening, we're going to have an update from the elementary center. Mrs. Barboni is going to speak with us a little bit about benchmarking and Acadience and where our students are at this point in the year. So, Mrs. Barboni, the stage is yours. You're welcome to.
Go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Right at your desk, I did set just some referencing material for you because there's a lot of acronyms that get tossed around, especially when we're going to be talking primarily about the Acadience reading. So when I'm talking about FSF, that's first sound fluency, LNF, letter naming fluency. So this is the paper that I have for you to reference so that you have that, you can see what it is that we're talking about. So we primarily use as our universal screener when the students come in. We want to get that first benchmark assessment to see where they're at, and we use Acadience as many other districts do as well. And we're using a group of teachers that we call our A team, and that is our team that goes around and assesses. So we have in that our title teachers, which are 3 of them. We also have our district speech teacher, who's in there assessing as well. We have our gifted teacher, Mrs. McGaughy, who is also district-wide. And then we have our 2 special education teachers as well. So that is the team that goes around. They assess all of the students. We give them a schedule. we have them assessing rather than the classroom teachers, just to have that kind of non-discriminatory, objective look at everything, and also to make sure that we're being consistent and having those teachers reassessing at the different benchmark points in the winter and in the spring as well. Many of those testers do, like if you're a title teacher, you will then test the students that you might be servicing or had serviced in the past. If you're the speech teacher, you'll stick with your speech students so that none of their speech impediments might be influencing the test. So that is how we go about it. So I just wanted to update you with how we're doing in the fall here today. And we're going to start with ELA, as that's the most important. There had been a question about what about the summer slide. So Mr. Williams, I believe that you kind of started the ball rolling of wanting to know what happened, what was our summer slide. And that, as most of you know, normally we have the kids at the end of the year, they end at a certain point. Then in the summer, obviously, they're not having that same intensive work at home. They're not practicing as much. We wish they were, but we do know that they're vacationing or doing different things. And so there does tend to be a little bit of a slide back in the progress that we've seen. So just letting you see, the Acadians benchmark is not, it's not a benchmark, it's a moving target. It's not a benchmark that's giving them the same exact assessment every time. It is a national benchmark, and we're conducting the test, and the target is moving according to every benchmark that we have. Sorry, because I'm legally blind, it's kind of hard for me to see, but you can see, is there a pointer on this? Like right in the center? Ah, great, thank you. So at the beginning, here's first grade here, and it will show you what we're testing in the beginning for nonsense word fluency. And you can see the very beginning of first grade, we don't test on that, but we go into the oral reading fluency for the middle of the year and the end of the year here. So it talks about where they should be if they're doing well, where they should be on average, and then what would be below the benchmark for that. So it gives us the different percentages. All right, this is a little clearer for me to see. So I just wanted to show you where we're coming in at with the kids in kindergarten. The best way for me to do this was to put the graduating class on there for you. So this is, the class of 2034, where we started with our students. These are the fall benchmarks, so you can see how they're coming in for us. So with that class, this is our current third grade class that we have. They came in at 41%, well below benchmark. When I put that with the below and well below, that is 60%. So that's a pretty large group of kids that came in below where we would want to see them being. The same over here, this is our current second grade class. We're looking at about 57% for the below and well below when I'm combining them together. Our current first grade class is 55% below or well below. And then the kindergarten group that we have right now is running at about 56% below or well below. And I just do want to point out, if you're doing quick math and you're adding everything here, it doesn't always add to an exact 100. It's like a 98 or 99% because they do round up the averages as well. So it might be like where this says 19%, it might actually be like an 18.7 and they're rounding it to the 19, or it could have been a 20.1 and they rounded it down. So when you're adding all of it, it is off by 1 or 2%. But just consistently as you're looking, we're somewhere in between, 55 to 60% of those students coming in at below or well below benchmark in kindergarten. Okay. So this is our current first grade class. This was the group that we had last year for kindergarten. That was one of the largest classes that we've ever had come through. Last year when we ended with 108 students, 70% of them at or above benchmark. When they came in this year, it was 36% at or above benchmark. And I'm going to step back and show you what it is that they're tested on so you can see when we're talking about is this truly a summer slide or not? So that will be our next slide for me to show you. But I wanted to back up here and just show you where this group had started at. Again, we're comparing apples to oranges, not apples to apples, with the benchmarking tests that they take. But we are still trying to see, are they making that average progress that we are expecting them to be making at that time on a nationally normed test? This is where they're supposed to be at the beginning. This is where they're supposed to be in the middle of the year. This is where they're supposed to be at the end of the year. So how are they comparing nationally on that, sorry. So we did start off again with just a higher number of students really in the below or well below area and did make progress in that. So this is what I wanted to show you. This is actually the front of a student booklet. This is the benchmarking, again, that we do 3 times a year, so the beginning in the fall. And we try to get that done about the second week of fall. We start in on that. That first week, we want to give the kids a chance to feel comfortable in the classroom, comfortable with their teachers, so we're not having those first week jitters, and that could be affecting their scores. And then we do jump right on into the assessments. Okay. And you can see here, this is where the acronym page comes in for you, all right? So we're talking about kindergarten, that first sound fluency. Can kids understand the phonemes? Can they understand the sounds that they're hearing? Do they, if I'm going do they know what's making that sound? Then we talk about letter naming fluency for kindergarten. Can they say the letters of the alphabet? Again, can they correlate the sounds with that as well? So that's what we're testing here at the beginning. Then you can see in the middle, we are still testing that as well in the winter, but then we are adding the phoneme segmentation fluency for it, and then nonsense word fluency. And nonsense word, obviously, we're not talking about words that are actual words, but we're saying if I say the sound j, I, p, and put it together, can the student then say jip? So not a real word, but can they blend that together? Then when we get to the very end, we're taking away the first sound fluency and we're focusing just on the last 3 skills. And then that's what we start the year with in first grade. However, now when we're talking about first grade, again, these 2 tests aren't exactly the same, although they're focusing on the same skill. We might be working with different vowel sounds or vowel families that the students haven't necessarily been exposed to already, okay? So that's where you see a lot of that sliding. So again, that's why I put the question mark next to the summer slide, because we're not testing apples to apples, we're testing apples to oranges. So it's where we would hope that they should be. Questions up until this point?
I have a question. So just to summarize, I don't know if you can go back a slide.
Sure.
The one where you showed, this one. When you're explaining that the kindergartners in spring last year were at 70% at or above the benchmark, that, as I think you were describing it, so that benchmark is where they should be as kindergartners at that part of the year.
Correct.
And that also is at the end of the year. So when we see 36%, generally the same students, 108, now 114, and only 36%, you're saying that 36% is where the benchmark they should be hitting at the beginning of the year, or they should hit by the end of their first grade year? So
this is the beginning of their first grade year. But the test that they're taking, the benchmarking test, although it is the same skill, the test is not the same. So here we might have been using different words, again, like different families that they had been exposed to, where we think they should be. This is where we're hoping that they would start off at, but it is not the same exact test that they ended with in the spring. It's testing the same skill, but not the same exact words, not the same exact families.
And since this is the beginning of the year, fall, when you're testing them and you're going to test them again throughout the year.
Correct.
That test is the same for them because they're in first grade.
The test always changes.
Gotcha.
And that's what I'm showing to you here. And I wish you could see this a little clearer. because I can't as well either up here, but the,
Yeah, I can kind of explain this slide a little. So in looking at first grade, at the beginning of the year benchmark is phoneme segmentation fluency and the nonsense word fluency. And nonsense word is broken into two subtests, which is whole words read and then correct letter sounds. So that's what makes up the composite score that helps us determine whether or not they're at benchmark or above benchmark. Then come the middle of the year, they take another assessment. That is now nonsense word fluency with the two subtests, and then the oral reading fluency, in which we're measuring how many words correct per minute as well as their level of accuracy. And that's what goes into the composite score. So that's why, as we're moving the students through, in your initial question, you are correct. When those students come in, we would hope and expect that they would still be near benchmark. That's quite a significant slide. But that's not something that we have control over because they're not with us during the summer. So that's ground that we now have to make up as we move through the remainder of this year.
So, as Ms. Barboni was saying, is question mark, because we're not doing the same test every time, so can't really say it, but if I understood you, Ms. Kelly, we are concerned that we're having some summer slide in that particular age bracket, at least that cohort, from kindergarten to first grade. Thank you.
okay, and then I just did the same for you so you could see this is the current second grade that we have right now. Again, I'm comparing, this data here is where they ended in the spring last year. So this was the end of the 23-24 year when they were first grade. Now they're going into second grade, and this is where they're starting. So again, 94 students at that time, not sure why I've got a little 89 hanging there. 54% were at or above benchmark, 46 were below or well below. And then we ended with 58% at or above benchmark with 40% below or well below. And I put this over here because I wanted you to see where they started when they came in the fall as first graders. So you could see the comparison between these two and then looking with the summer in between. Okay, so this is where they end, then we have the summer, and then this is where they started off for us. So actually here, an increase in the at or above benchmark.
Yeah, and I'd like to add too, if you go back to that chart, the composite score, again, is what makes that determination, but that's a moving number. So with every fall, winter, and spring benchmark, that number is increasing with the different assessments. So it's not only a moving target that's increasing, we're wanting to keep those students that are at or above benchmark, but then we're also putting in those resources to help grow those students that aren't at or above benchmark to get them into that at or above benchmark range. So it's constantly a growing ladder, a moving ladder that we're maintaining kids. They have to grow to be able to maintain that above, at or above benchmark, but then also amplifying the growth for those students that are below or well below to move them into those that other category.
And again, just showing you how the test changes, where we leave off at, where we pick up at, and then notice how it changes as well, again, in the second benchmarking for second grade and in the third benchmarking period for second grade as well. So you can see now we're kicking off the nonsense word fluency in that area. So this is the current third grade. This was the class that we were talking more about last year that we were concerned with. This was the second grade class that tended to be very low, that we had a lot of questions about last year. So we ended with 35% of them at or above benchmark. Coming into us, 38% at or above benchmark. So you can see where that is there. And last year's growth, again, a large number of students, we actually went down, but as I showed you, the test changes for them, excuse me, let me back it up, changes for them where they actually start off, and you can see we're getting rid of nonsense word fluency So that component now is no longer in there when we're calculating the score of their reading composite score. And then just showing you the difference for third grade. This is our third grade going into, excuse me, this was the end of third grade last year. This is our current fourth grade. So 93 students, about the same this year, 95, 53% at or above benchmark, 50% at or above benchmark here. And this is more of an apples to apples comparison, because at this point in time, we're looking to see what their comprehension is and their oral reading fluency. So, tier one, what are we doing? So we've talked to you before about Haggerty. We use that primarily in our kindergarten and our first grade, some of our kids in second grade as well. That's when we're talking about phonemic awareness, and we want our kids to really understand the oral language, and then how that translates into the connection with letters, with the sounds, and then eventually from there going into making words, and then from words making into sentences, and so on and so forth. So we're starting off with the Haggerty, and then we move into foundations, which we do, K through 3, and we do use MyView as our text for comprehension and for reading out loud with the students. We have decodable readers as well, since we've been using and talking about the science of reading. And again, having our students understand how words are formed, and then how to use that to figure out the sounds, the word families, and we are picking up decodable readers that align with foundations as well, so that when teachers are reading with the students, they can pool them into smaller groups according to the different areas of skills that they might be having issues with. And we delineate the different areas of the skills from the cadence, but then beyond that, when we do the cadence, like right here, we would look at all of the students who are in red, who are well below, and we see how many students are in there. Here we have 37 from the grade level in this area, for example, okay? So when I'm looking at supports for these kids, I'm gonna look at these students, I'm gonna say which students have IEPs, which students are receiving learning support already. Maybe there's 10 to 12 students who are already going with our learning support. I'm gonna take them out of this, so then I'm left maybe with 27 other students. Then I wanna dig deeper into those students and find out exactly what is it that's causing them to score below or well below, and how can we help them. So we then go further, and this year we brought on the 95% group, which delineates further and drills down into specific skills. So our title staff, not the entire A team, but just our title staff, then went through and they tested the students that were in the red to see what are the skill areas that they're having deficits in. There may have been a handful of kids here and there in the yellow, if it was a grade level, that had a small number of red, but for the most part, it was primarily our red students that we drilled down into. So they drilled down through there with the 95%, and this was our first year for doing that. And we got the 95% group that they take these kiddos into more of an intensive intervention time with them and work in a small group of 4 to 5. So backing up again, when we do our intervention, this was the part of the schedule I explained to you last year, so let me kind of refresh for you. It's a time in the day for 50 minutes where we don't teach anything new. We don't want the students being pulled out of that intervention time to miss anything from the core. So that would be when we're providing primarily the learning support services, the speech, the title, any sort of extra support services that they would need. So students who aren't having learning support would go to a tier 2 in title. Learning support is also a tiered support. It is a tier 3 support, and they are doing the 95% group as well. Some of those students are one-on-one, or two-on-one, three-on-one, much smaller groups, and they're working at a slower level. So our 3 title teachers are working with these students, again, based on the skill test that they take for 95%, physically manipulating the words. Some of them, again, if we're saying like dog, maybe the students are pushing up the different letters and the different sounds, d, ah, g, and then spreading it, just different physical manipulation for them. So I just wanted you to see what that kind of looks like. Also in tier 2, when you're looking at some of the other students who are in red, who maybe weren't the lowest of our red students once we drilled down with the 95%, but they were the remaining of the red, because as we're looking at our title, we have 3 teachers. They can take a max of 5 kids. That's 15 students per group. So obviously if I have 25 and I have 10 other students, I'm not fitting into that group at that time. So who's supporting them? How are they being supported? They're still being supported in an intervention group. They're still working on either the 95% group, or they're working on Fun and Focus, which is the intervention program component of foundations that we use. So how we go about that is during the intervention time that we have built into this schedule, we have the 5 classroom teachers. So learning support has taken the students they're working with. Title's taken the 15 students they're working with. Now we're left with, say, maybe 65 students. We're now taking those students and dividing them amongst the grade level classroom teachers based on their area of skill and where they need to be. Right now, we have 2 per grade level, basically, that are working with students who are in the red or in the yellow, and then they are separated by the skill reinforcement that they need. Those groups are flexible, and we benchmark them, so we're working with them in small groups. I would say there's like 8 per room, 9 per room, so they're not as intensive as a title group or a special education group for learning support, but they are smaller groups. They're not a whole class group. They're working with the teachers in the room during that intervention time, and then we are benchmarking them as well with the Cadence. The Cadence has progress monitoring them. A Cadence has progress monitoring that we can do bi-weekly with them to see what kind of progress they're making along the way. Those students who are a little higher than the 95%, we can have working on the Fun and Focus. Those might be our students who are in the yellow or maybe a lower green area. So then this gives us the option of, okay, if a student's making progress, can we switch them into a higher group? If they're in Fun and Focus and they're not making progress, do they need to maybe go to a 95% group in a classroom? Or in the classroom, if they're not, do they need to be considered going into a title group once these students, because the goal obviously is to have them making progress and exiting out of title. So that's the way that cycle kind of twirls around. I don't know if I'm making sense with it. Any questions about that? Okay. So those are flexible, and again, we do the progress monitoring, and then we do the benchmarking 3 times a year for that. So then I just wanted to break it down. Everything I said is right here just for you to kind of understand. So the intervention groups that we do, intervention happens daily, but we switch 3 times a week. And that's the switching between the classes that I had explained to you. Our primary focus is ELA, so that's the bulk of my data. I do have math data here to show you if you're interested in, but this is what we're focused on, is the ELA right here. As I explained, they're either going to a Fun and Focus group or a 95% group if they are struggling. If they're on grade level, then we're doing different extension activities from my view with them. If they're above grade level, a lot of them are doing novel studies, chapter books, anything in extension for them. So we're trying to hit all of our students at the levels that they're working at, and either continuing to bring them up, bless you, or to enrich them further. Students who go to title are going 5 times a week. So even though we're switching 3 times, the other 2 days of the week, those students are in their regular classroom, working with the teacher at their level, but not necessarily switching. But title students do get pulled out 5 times a week. Those students who are getting that intensive small group title service. That's the same with learning support as well. We do have one of our title teachers who is now working this year he has done math in the past, but this year he actually picked up the Math 180 program. That is the partner to the Read 180 program that they use at the middle school. And he checked that out this summer, so he's starting that this year. So 2 times a week, he pulls the students who we have determined need that little extra math boost, or that the teachers say to them, hey, I noticed when you're doing math, this specific concept this child seems to be having trouble with, can you work on this with them? So he is pulling them for that. And again, the 95% group is the program that we're using this year for title. So that's ELA. That's the bulk of everything. I'm happy to show you the math. I think the primary questions will come from this, though.
Mr. President?
Dr. Pushek?
Thank you, Mrs. Barboni. If I can ask a few ELA questions. Do we run a summer program?
We do not.
We do not.
The only summer program that we have had is the kindergarten boot camp, which has been excellent. You know, that does primarily tend to focus just on routines and getting the kids ready for kindergarten so that when they come in, we don't spend as much time on the routines and we can get to actual teaching. Prior,
Yeah, I can
maybe
add.
3 or 4 years ago now, we had the summer.
So with the COVID funds, we did have a summer program here at the elementary. It became more and more challenging to staff, and so for the final year, we did contract with the IU, and that was not this past summer, but the summer before. And so this past summer, we just put those funds towards an additional year of kindergarten boot camp.
Do we have any data from those years that we ran a summer program? If we would disaggregate the students taking the summer program, what would be their performance on the benchmark in the fall compared with the rest of their cohort?
I would have to pull it up. I mean, it all exists somewhere. I don't have it filtered out.
I was just
so,
wondering because that would show us,
Yeah.
you know, if
Yeah.
we would need
I don't know
resources for
that
summer programming.
that year, sorry, you're really pushing my memory. I don't know, that was the year we had started Foundations and we pulled in the summer program that they had. I don't know if that was the year we started the Cadence.
Well, and one of the challenges that we had, and we can most definitely pull up the data, but it wasn't always our staff. We were often
Yeah.
hiring substitutes or staff from other districts that didn't have summer programs that were looking for summer employment and were not familiar with Foundations, hadn't gone through the training, and we have a day basically to provide the resources, show them how to use it, and you know, there's a reason we went with Foundations. It's highly research-based, and if you don't have the proper training, it's just not as effective. So, you know, that made it very challenging.
Yeah, I was just curious, so
Yeah.
thank you for that. My second question is, as we know, K1 and 2 are non-PSSA tested grades, 3 and 4 are. Are we finding Acadians being a good predictive measure on PSSA performance for 3rd and 4th grade?
That's a great question. Based on the Future Ready Index that I saw today, I don't know that it necessarily was. But what it.
We're talking about two different things.
Exactly.
We're talking about, I would say achievement-wise, it can be a pretty good predictor. However, it's not necessarily showing us the growth. And our growth was pretty phenomenal this past year. So whether or not we hit the benchmark, it can be a fairly good predictor, but there's two components to how our students are performing. And I think one of the biggest pieces is the growth, and it isn't necessarily a predictor of that.
Thank you.
The only other question I had on ELA, because you know this data better than we do. And I look at those numbers, and I have things that are concerning to me as a lay person or as a parent. So what's concerning for you based on the numbers you see? And do you have any ideas on how we might address that? Outside of the tiers, and I
Yeah.
understand it's not like you're not doing anything, but
I mean, sure, when I initially look at it, right, if I'm looking at it from just a quick glance eyes, right, you're going, wow, these numbers are low and then stay low and some of them drop. But then when you dig in further and you know how it's moving, for me, my personal biggest thing is I want to see the kids growing. I want to see the growth of the students. So what is difficult is that I prefer looking at the progress monitoring, because then I'm able to see actually how one student's doing and what progress they've actually made. That to me is more telling for what we're trying to accomplish in the classroom and what we're trying to do to push the students along. Would I like to see that they're hitting all of the national benchmarks? Sure, but I also realize we don't come in at the national benchmark ideal.
sure.
You know.
And that, I guess that's when I look at the four-color charts, I see a variety. I mean, we have kids are above average, 20,
Correct.
30%. Then we have 20, 30% in the red. And so I can see the challenge in every age bracket, which is, 90 to 100 plus kids.
Yeah.
We have a lot of variety in those cohorts.
So my thought, I mean, I obviously haven't dug in deeper, but once you start getting into it, you really could all go a whole bunch of different directions. And I thought, okay, because it does tell me the number of kids and I can dig in and see who those students are, then I can pull out and see who exactly is learning support, who does have an IEP, who are students that transferred in. I could go even further and talk about who's our economically disadvantaged students. So all of that data I know does make a difference just from when I've done the title reports and I'm looking at different data for the Future Ready Index or the PSSA data. I know all of those different factors make a difference. Have I dug into the cadence data that way yet? I have not. Have I thought about it? Absolutely. I mean, I am curious to know, when I have some time to start really digging in, who's not moving? Is it the same students repeatedly? And if I'm looking at a certain percentage of maybe who's in the top of my red or who's in my yellow, those particular students, do they stay there all the way through K through 4? Are these students who never move? It's unfortunate, but there are sometimes some students that they're not hitting those national norms where we would like them to be. But again, that's why I go back and I focus on, but them as individuals, where were they and how have they grown? And as an educator, that for me is more important.
Makes sense. Do you have any other questions? Mr. Williams?
So I just have and thank you, by the way. I appreciate the benchmark testing that you're giving us. But, I think that I don't say a whole lot, but I kind of got a little frustrated when we were looking at PSSA scores, right? And the problem with PSSA scores is they only tell you one story. And, I understand that, this agenda is full of things that we have to spend money on and et cetera, but it's almost to prove a little bit of a point, and that is, some of our academic focus should be in that K1, 2, because again, if you consistently have half your grade level not being able to read on benchmark, you're going to stay in the ballpark of poor PSSA scores. And so I know that we don't have a whole lot of flexibility in the budget. I get that. But if we do, at any point, my at least thoughts or vote would be is that we really look at that K1, 2, say how can we as a board kind of support things, whether or not it is, to Dr. Pushek's point, maybe it is a summer program, or maybe it is, I know we just got 95%, that's a great tier 2 strategy just to help that out, because it's just, under my experience, is that you'll never move those PSSA numbers if half your kids can't read the test, regardless of how comprehensive that they can be. And you burden title, and title gets overflown, and then you can't support all of them. So we know that 50% of these kids walking in the door can't read on level. So if the board can focus on that academics, that's where I would put my vote at.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Mr. President,
Mr. Brumage?
I have a couple as well, and, last year when we had that meeting, I think I ended the meeting with, bring us stuff to the board, what can we be doing? And I agree and echo the comments that have been stated. You had mentioned in your comment to Mr. Blazier that at the end of your comment, you mentioned that we're not at the national, or we're not going to keep up with the national. Can you explain that comment a little bit?
When I'm looking at where we're coming in, because these are national, let me go back. Again, the slide I can't see real well, sorry. I wish I should have printed this one for you guys.
You can just verbally explain it if
Yeah,
it's easier.
just when you're looking here in the center,
Can you point at the other screen?
Hillary, could you, most of us can see this one easier. Sorry.
when you're looking over here, okay, this is the benchmark. This is where we would like them to be coming in at, and that's a national benchmark, and we're not coming in at that on some of them. Like you said, you saw 60% of them are not coming in at the benchmark, which shows you where we want them to be at the beginning of the year, where we want them to be in the middle of the year, where we want them to be at the end of the year. So when we're looking at this, like when we're looking at what is red or yellow in a certain area, these are the numbers that we're looking at. The oral reading fluency here, the OR, is the primary score that we're looking at when we get up into the middle of first grade, and then all the way to the end. So this is the main bulk of what we're looking at. Okay, that's how the test changes.
But it is a national benchmark of peer group.
Yes. I don't know if you want to.
So, I mean, it is a benchmark that we should be achieving.
Well,
It's not an artificial number. It is a peer group.
It's a national benchmark. The science behind it or how they've come across that, I don't know all the details to that, but that is what it is a national benchmark.
Yeah, it's nationally normed. So they're putting those assessments out across multiple demographic areas across the United States and providing that assessment data back to come up with where these benchmarks are on average.
Okay.
So you've got the high performing and you have the low performing to come up with where those benchmarks are.
Come up with a norm.
Right.
Yeah.
Essentially, when you take a child to the doctor and they say height-wise, they're at the 95th percentile, but weight-wise, they're at the 50th percentile. Same idea. This is just with reading and math.
Thank you. You mentioned Title. If I'm correct, Title's the number one service that we're offering to these below-average non-IEP students. Is that what I heard? To the 15 lowest non-IEP
Yes, it is
students?
at this point in time, it is the intensive program that we are offering on top of what they're doing in the classroom. So it's another service, another layer of support for them because we are a Title I school, so they are receiving services when they're in the room, those other times as well. But this is the intensive pull out that we're using for them.
And for those, you mentioned we have 3 teachers.
Yes.
Are those teachers ELA specialists?
2 of them are, yes.
And of the 15 students that they see, is that per grade level?
Yes.
Can students, you mentioned goals to graduate out of the program. But looking at the below basic numbers, we have a lot of kids there. So if one ages out, is that an inter-year age out? Is that the end of the year age out? Is that a daily age out? What about relapses?
They don't.
What about the summer slide?
You mean scoring out, because there's not an age?
You're scoring out, sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Not age out.
Yeah, so it is according to progress, yes, and if we can get them,
Like a daily progress? Like when would they test
no,
or score?
they monitor them weekly in Title.
So that 15 number, those 15 students can change up to potentially a weekly.
They don't change the students weekly. They work with them for usually a quarter at a time because they're monitoring them. And rarely, honestly, rarely do we see a student make that kind of progress that they would max out. I've only ever seen that once or twice, that they would max out that quickly within a week or two. They tend to make that progress and need those services for the entire quarter. And then we can see where they've gone from there. Their progress monitored on a weekly basis, and then they also take the benchmarking tests as well. And then when the students in a grade level are benchmarked, we do re-look at all of them and see if any of them have changed their ranking where they were.
In regards to the summer slide, I know with the PSSAs, we get the peer group data, we get all the other schools and all the data sets. I don't know if it's similar here, but is there data on the summer slide for, other districts like, as such as ours? Like, is this normal for kids to have that large of a summer slide?
Again, that's a great question. Summer slide exists and the phrasing exists, so I'm sure that there is. What the exact breakdown is, I don't know.
If I can add to that, if you look at this slide at the top, and I apologize because I see that it's really hard to see, but going from the end of year in kindergarten to the beginning of the year in first grade, the composite score at the beginning of first grade is 113. The end of year kindergarten composite score is 119. So that kind of gives you an idea from a national level what Acadians would expect that summer slide to look like.
So not much.
Not much. And then, but from first to second grade, the end of first grade is 155, beginning of second grade is 141. So, there is a little bit more of a slide. And I think in our data, we saw a bigger slide, more so than what they had calculated here. But across the population, they do see a larger slide between certain grade levels.
I know when I was in education, I felt like there was always something new and something shiny we were chasing each and every year. And every year there's a new, at the in-service, something announced of how we were going to teach this year. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Foundations sounded like it was a newer program. How many years have we using Foundations?
No, Foundations, it's not newer. This, I believe, is our 5th year with it now. The 95% is new to us this year.
Okay, and the purpose of Foundations, again, is for all K through 3? Everybody
Yes.
does Foundations?
Foundations, yes.
And if we've been using it for 4 or 5 years, the number that strikes me is that if we've been using this for that long, if we have one class or one student body that scores off, right, it's an anomaly, we talked about that second grade, but then we have all of our classes 50% below or basic. So I sit there and say, if we have one, it's an anomaly. If it's all of them, it's me. So when we see all the classes scoring 50% below one out of 2 kids, I sit there and say, what do we do?
I'm not sure that it's a fair assumption at this point because we are simply looking at end of year and where they came in at the start of this year. I think what we need to do is re-review this data, looking at the fall and then comparing it to where we are in the spring. I don't remember if it was your kindergarten slide or not where you saw the number of students that moved. And again, if we're simply looking at a benchmark, we're undermining the system and how we help kids grow. We have no control over how they come to us or where they're performing. All we can do is take what we have and encourage and enrich and help them to grow. And if you look at our PSSA data, we're at 100%. Once that's released publicly, we're at 100% growth for both math, ELA, and science. So I think the system is healthy. We still have a lot of work to do because I wouldn't be happy unless we had 95% of our students at least at or above benchmark. Is that possible? Science says not really, but can we help them grow to their maximum potential? Yes, and I think that's what we're doing as an educational entity.
And thank you for that. And to Jesse's point, I think, early on matters a lot, but growth versus being that far below your peer group is still astonishing. And when we had this same meeting on the PSSA data, there was a lot of below proficient on the PSSA data too. That was quite concerning. So I do see a lot of concerns in this stuff. Thank you.
I want to add one comment for some clarity that I think, I'll be honest with you too, I sat there telling myself, don't say anything, don't say anything. But I do think it adds to the discussion that at least you know there's more questions to ask than leaving tonight thinking you have too many answers. I think it leads to more discussion and questions. One thing that I think highlights, is it a summer slide or not, and how we've highlighted the test changing, is if you look at the end of year for second grade oral reading fluency, that number in bold is 87. So that is us saying second graders, end of the school year, benchmark need to be reading 87 words. In order to be the same level of at benchmark achievement when they return to us in third grade, the number drops to 70. And so like a 17-word difference between spring and fall, to me, just highlights that these tests are not meant to track a fluid, progression between one grade year to the next. And so there's a lot more to this set of data than just assessing a summer slide. I think that's worth assessing, and I think it will be a topic that you guys continue to discuss. But I don't want you leaving tonight thinking that all of this data points directly towards a summer slide. Okay, thank you.
Mr. President, just for me, I think maybe I'm trying to summarize and kind of bottom line. Maybe what I'm seeing is not so much the gap between end of each year in the spring and the beginning of the fall, the summer slide, but the progression or lack thereof within the school year. And I think that's where I'm trying to understand when I see those pie charts and the data and whatnot. If we come in at, say, 60% is below proficient or below benchmark, and at the end of that calendar year or end of that school year, we're maybe to 50. So we've gained 10% as part of a bench. Is that a fair? No?
No, that's
not the
what's
way I'm reading it?
Yeah, I mean, I understand. Again, it's to the national norm, but the test changes. So they're not taking the same test, and they're not being tested on the same skill. And that's why I was showing you, like, this is a better one to see here. So that's why I'm showing you what they're being tested on.
Yeah,
So,
I have a real hard time trying to interpret
Yep,
what that
yep.
means. But, I mean, if you'd go back a slide, if you would, to the first, yeah, like this one. So for instance, on the far left, it says 35 and 14%.
right,
And then at the end of that first year, it's 14 and 26.
right.
So you're at, what is that, 49 to 40, right?
Yep.
So we've gained 10% in growth.
Different-
Me as a
different
lay
test,
permit.
but
As a
still
different test,
to
but
the
they've
norm.
improved
To the norm.
10%.
But they were not
Right.
testing the same
Right,
skills.
compared to, right.
So, right, so they improved 10% as far as meeting a national norm of where they should be on average.
Fair enough. As long as
But-
there's.
Right, but they're not, it's not testing the same exact skill. So it's hard to say, like, how much did these students improve on letter naming fluency? I don't know, because we don't test
Sure,
that
as
at
an
the end.
individual skill, that's an aggregate. So I guess where I was headed with all of that is, and maybe it's kind of discussed already, is how can we get another 10%? How can we get another 15%, to Mrs. Kelly's point? To get everybody to 95 would be an awesome goal. So is it additional resources in the early years? Is it an additional Title I teacher? Is
Sure.
it an additional smaller class? I mean, or is it a different program altogether? Foundation
You're never
versus-
going to get me to say that I wouldn't love to have all those things. If you want to give me
Well,
more
and
title
that's
teachers,
where, as a board,
great. You want
to Mr. Williams' point, if there's a
Absolutely.
better baseline from the get-go, we would expect PSSAs to
Right.
improve, and we would expect other keystones, and all the way down the line. So how do we, as a board, allocate proper
Right,
resources and policies,
all of
et cetera?
those, of course, any resources, especially quality resources. I mean, there's a difference between having a body in the building and having someone who's highly qualified.
No doubt.
And knows what they're doing and has been through the proper training and has those relationships with the kids and is well-skilled, absolutely. There also is, if I'm being truthful, I mean, we are given the students that we're given. Every child can learn, but every child's ability differs. And so, again, that's why I focus on who is this student, what do they know, and how can I take them from where they are to a further point and give them growth. That's our job, to grow them and to prepare them the best that we can to their abilities. Will we get to where everyone's 95%? I think that that's a dream. I mean, I don't see that happening in the nation at all, but can we have 95% of our children growing? Absolutely.
No, it's as an individual basis, you're 100% correct. As an aggregate basis, this, our step back view needs to be, how do we try to raise all the boats?
Absolutely.
And so, absolutely, growth is important as an individual, and his growth is different than his growth and my growth, and et cetera. But yeah, all that there's positive movement. How do we get that positive movement to even hit where, as a national average or aggregate,
Right.
We can be, to that point.
And we look at all of the various best practices in
Sure.
education, and that's obviously what we're trying to do with, the different research programs that we're bringing into the school, and doing things like the intervention time, because we're trying to, make people in small groups when we don't have them, and moving people around to be able to work with students at their level. So intervention is a time where we essentially have 10 different instructors descending on a grade level, because we have the 5 classroom teachers, we have the 3 title, we have the 2 learning support. So yes, we are trying to work with the resources we have. More resources are always appreciated.
And just to add too, we're still refining our process. So 5 years ago, it's a totally different reading philosophy here. And over the past 5 years, now into our 6th, we've been transitioning to the science of reading. And so you don't want to throw all the boats at it until you know and can define what the issues are. So the first step, we're redefining our core and our tier 1 interventions. Now we're seeing how our students are responding. We're getting feedback from our teachers, both our regular education teachers, special ed, and our Title I specialists. And so that's what led to adopting the 95% group, because we realized, okay, now we need to drill down more into specific skills to provide guided instruction for our students who aren't making it. We get through this year, we reevaluate, are there additional skills and tools that we need to further adopt? And it's not about the next new penny, it's about what aligns with the research and is proven to show growth in students. But we have to define the problem first. So we've defined the problem, we've now adopted the 95% group. Now the next step is to reevaluate. We won't be able to reevaluate until we see where our data ends at the end of this year.
Has there been any anecdotal information from either the teachers or instructors, or the parents or anybody along those lines, that whether, the 95 or the Title I, or, what's working?
We
Have
had
you
a
heard
lot of
any sort
teachers show up for training over the summer for the 95%
We did.
group. And to me, that speaks volumes.
Yeah.
So willingly show up.
Just, Ms. Kelly, once you define whatever you need, you're going to get a vote yes from me on here. I've voted enough for septic tanks and systems and all that kind of stuff. So if you define it and you say, hey, this is going to help K-1-2, you're going to get a yes out of me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Kelly and Mrs. Barboni.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. President,
Dr. Bushak.
I do need to make one final comment. I just want to compliment the board on our discussion tonight. This is exciting. If we are truly student-centered and future-focused, this is a great focus of the board. To Mr. Williams' point, I think the board will continue to be supportive. Mrs. Kelly shared with us that she'll bring to us what we think that they need, and I think we'll continue to do that. It was not such a short time ago that there was $0, ladies and gentlemen, $0 in curriculum, and that school board was fine with $0 in curriculum. We are hundreds of thousands of dollars each budget each year into our curriculum. So I think we have a great focus. As I said, it's exciting to have dialogue among our board colleagues with regard to the education of our children. This is just the elementary school. We're excited to move on to the middle and the high school as we go out through the year to hear the progress in those buildings as well. But Kudos to this board for engaging in this dialogue tonight, and I truly look forward to more discussions around these topics as well. So, and thank you, Mrs. Barboni, and the rest of the administration. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I agree. We will also make sure when we flush that it goes where it needs to go as well, so you get all the bells and whistles. The next item on the agenda is guest citizen comments. We don't have anybody that signed up to speak to the board today, so the chair recognizes Dr. Ken Berlin for superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just three quick items. I wanted to recognize the hardship of the Maxon family. They had a house fire. If you watch the news or if you know them or live by them, thankfully no injuries, but I believe the house pretty much a total loss. And they do have 3 children that attend the elementary. So our employees took up a collection that will be going all week for that family. So I just wanted to recognize their hardship and our hearts go out to them. Fall activities and athletics, really excellent student achievement all the way around. We have multiple teams moving towards the playoffs. There's a lot of extracurricular activities running, the theater program and the band. They have concerts and plays coming up. So I don't want to single out any one group. I think we all know that all of those, just about every single group is really moving well and performing. And that really is a big part of what keeps students engaged in schools. I couldn't be a stronger proponent of strong extracurricular and athletic activities, especially as the students get into the older grades. That's where they form relationships that last a lifetime. That's when they're influenced by coaches and directors and that type of thing. And they learn life lessons that stay with them. So I'm really proud of our students, and I want to thank all of our coaches and extracurricular folks for the work they do there. And then finally, we're signed up to participate this week in Operation Safe Stop. This is the 28th annual year that it's been running. And it simply is a coordination with our bus drivers and the local authorities. So we let the PSP know that we'll be conducting Operation Safe Stop, which is basically observation by our drivers of any civil drivers that don't obey bus laws. And then they record that information, and that goes on to the authorities. And then we also identify problem areas in the district where we have concerns, and we'll let the authorities know about that. And we'll report all of that information to them for follow-up and to PennDOT. So it's just very important, especially out where we live. We all know how rural we are, and traffic can be very dangerous, perhaps more dangerous sometimes on rural highways that are dark and don't have street lights and sidewalks and that type of thing. It's a big part of what we do, getting here, everyone here every day. So that's Operation Safe Stop. That's all I had for this evening,
Thank
Mr.
you.
President.
Are there any questions from the board for Dr. Berlin? Hearing none, I thank you for your report. The chair recognizes Ms. Vicki Bendig, Business Administrator, for a report.
Thank you, Mr. President. For this evening, I have the treasurer's reports as presented at last meeting, but in addition to that, I also have the year-to-date budget versus actual report. This is as of September 30th, and so we are 25% of the fiscal year down, and we have collected 30.45% of our budgeted revenues, and we have spent overall 16.48% of our expenditures. There are some extra expenditures in some categories that you'll see on the budgetary transfer, and we do not yet have a calculation for the charter school tuition rate. I'm still working on that, getting the ADMs so that we can figure out what our charter school rate is going to be. So I'll have a transfer next month to move money from budgetary reserve into the charter school funding account strings. And then I also have the cafeteria profit versus profit loss for the month. This is as of the end of September. We had $120,452.09 in revenue, and we had $105,969.47 in expenses. So a net profit for the month of $14,482.62. However, that brings our year-to-date loss up to $31,750.71. So keep in mind, we still have bills that we're paying in July and August where we're not generating revenue because we're not feeding children. So as the months come and we're feeding more kids per day, I will say participation at the elementary school is phenomenal. We're serving practically 95% of every student in the elementary school. They're eating breakfast and almost eating lunch, almost all of them, not as many, eating lunch as well. So I think that's fantastic. And then the student activities balance in that account as of the end of September, $62,185.50. And moving on to the bill lists, I presented last meeting the bills that were checks already written prior to the work session. So for tonight, the additions to that are the checks that were written between the work session and the board meeting. General fund bills totaling $4,825.92. There were no additional capital projects. And the cafeteria bill check already written, $56,559.40. I will say that we do pay that in advance because they give us a discount if we pay it by a certain day of the month, which our board meeting does not always coincide with. So the bill list for board approval for tonight, general fund bills, $649,851.33. Capital projects, $28,250. And that bill is for the Scobell Company that is part of the generator installation. And then cafeteria, $2,000.98. And that is all I have for this evening.
I'll entertain a motion to approve the reports, payments, and invoices as presented.
So moved, push check.
Do we have a second?
Williams.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion or questions?
Mr. President, I just have one quick question.
Mr. Morvay?
Ms. Bending, under the bill list, the Hewlett-Packard Financial Services, is that a pension problem, or is that computers, or is that, I guess,
It's a lease payment on laptops.
oh, so that's part of that program that we have, okay. It just seemed like an odd conjunction of terms. Okay, thank you.
Hearing no other questions, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries. Thank you, Mrs. Bendig. There are no items tonight on the agenda under legal advisement. The chair recognizes Dr. Andy Pushek for finance.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have one item tonight for the board's consideration. That's 7A, to approve the monthly budgetary transfer from budget to actual report as attached. So moved.
Morvay, second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or questions on finance F1? The only question I had, Mrs. Bendig, is the largest item in there was like insurance, was an insurance payment. I want to say, is it just that our insurance quotes are higher than we had anticipated?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Seems to be par for the course for all of us. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries.
That's all we have, Mr. President, under finance.
Thank you, Dr. Pushek. Chair recognizes Mr. Steve Morvay for building and grounds.
Yes, Mr. President, there's one item on the agenda tonight, which is item A, which is the Brevo Access Control System. And the motion is to approve the purchase and installation of the additional Brevo Access Control System modules at the Wattsburg Area Elementary Center, not to exceed a cost of $12,575, funded from committed balances for fund and safety per the attachment as well. So moved.
Nicole, second.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or discussion on the one item under Building and Grounds? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Morvay.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The chair recognizes Ms. Nicole Lee for personnel.
Thank you, Mr. President. As normal, I have quite a few items, and without objection, I'd like to move all in a group. They would include A, resignations as listed, B, leave requests as listed, C, job description for the homeless liaison, D, an additional addendum for job descriptions to include maintenance, E, organizational charts, F, Barber National Institute one-to-one service aid agreements, G, conference requests as listed, and H, appointments as listed, including on the addendum, and I, tuition reimbursements as listed. So moved.
Second, Pushchak.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or discussion on the multiple items under personnel? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you, Mrs. Lee. For policy, something for Ms. Burlingham, I'll entertain a motion for our first reading of the policy 625 procurement cards, and also B, which is the second reading of the policy 249 on bullying and cyberbullying.
Nicole, so moved.
Morvay, second.
Thank you. Do you have any question or discussion on the first reading and then the second reading of policies? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. For curriculum, we have Mr. Steve Morvay.
Mr. President, Mrs. Barboni gave me a presentation this morning, or this afternoon.
She
For
did a
curriculum.
great job.
Yes, very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Jesse Williams for technology.
Mr. President, I don't have anything at this time.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Greg Brummagen for transportation.
Mr. President, I have one item for tonight. That is transportation request A, to approve the transportation request and ratification of field trip since last meeting as attached.
Do we need a second?
Second, Pushchak.
Thank you. Any discussion or questions on the one item under transportation?
I know, Mr. President, just one, I mentioned this, I think, last school year too. And I realize that a lot of these funds come out of the Student Activities Fund. I just find it personally troublesome when we approve something that says to be determined as an estimate. Like it's an estimate.
For
Can
price,
we-
for price.
Yeah, for the price. Yeah, I just feel like I cut, when I clicked on it, there was one that was to be determined, a marching band one. Yeah. And again, I know it comes out of a Student Activities Fund. I still just feel like it's an estimate. Can't we throw some number in, even if we use last year's number, so that we have something to go off of?
So those actually were individual for each competition that they attend. So they may attend 7 competitions in the year. So rather than putting each individual one in there, I lump them in as, will you approve the band to go to all of their competitions for the season? And so that, it says to be determined because, it could vary on the amount of time that they're gone. That changes. I could go through and add it all up. It would still be just an estimate. I mean, obviously it says estimated, so I get your
I
point.
guess my point is blank check versus $20,000. At least I know it's defined at $20,000 as an estimate.
Yeah, that's a point well taken. In the general fund budget, though, we do carve off an amount for student activities, and we know from year to year about what each group spends. And the band, for example, knows their travel budget needs to be within these bumper points. So the exact amount to be determined, but that's the practice, but I do really understand, hey, can we put a number on that? I think during the budgeting time, we could highlight that, so you'd know, but we'd be open to further refining that as well.
Thank you. Just since it's an estimate, I figured any number's better than no number. I just feel like when we vote and approve something as a board without an actual number behind it, I take a question to that as all personally. Thank you.
And just to clarify, so obviously that's the whole band season. We don't approve the football team based on whether we're going to make a playoff game or not, which could also vary because it comes out of a different funding category, budget category. All right, thank you. Without any other questions, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Bremingen. Chair recognizes Mr. Williams for athletic and extracurricular.
Yeah, that's me. I'm sorry. I'm Leah today. I'll sit over here, be cold. And so I got three things to bring forward. The first one is A, the volunteer list additions. The second one is the athletic appointments for the winter/spring athletic calendar. And then last but not least, C, the addendum for the extracurriculum appointments as shown. I'd like to move all three of those.
Second, push check.
Thank you. Is there any question or discussion on three items under athletic and extracurricular? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Williams. There are no items under miscellaneous on tonight's agenda. The chair recognizes Mr. Steve Morvay for Erie County Technical School report.
Mr. President, a few brief items on the Erie County Technical School, which we had our board meeting, the Joint Operating Committee back in September. Just a few dates. Back in late September, they had their heavy equipment day, which apparently went very, very well with the equipment and demonstrations and whatnot that they had. Then upcoming dates, next month in the 2nd would be a community open house. That is a 7 p.m. That's open to the public. That's again to tour the building and see some of the facilities and whatnot there at the technical school. That's on the 2nd. On the 11th of November will be the 9th grade. Will be there. They'll start their tours of the facility and potentially gauge interest. And then on the 21st, that'll be the open house for new students, those that commit to the technical schools. That's open for students and parents as well. We also covered a few items where we approved various policies within the technical school, some hazing items, threats, weapons, etc. Those are all basically all security-related policies that we did approved. As well, there was some discussion regarding some new programs. They're working through some committees internally, and some of the items that are potentially on the list include heavy equipment, veterinary technicians, dental assistants, logistics, small engine repair, aviation sciences, and then plumbing, HVAC. So those are additional courses that are being considered at the technical school, given the space with the new addition. That's what's there as well. Just speaking of that, on the addition, there was about $150,000 left in the contingency overall between fixtures and furnishings as well as construction contingency. That's what's left. That'll roll into a capital program or capital fund as the job continues to close. And then just finally some enrollment numbers. Just wanted to give some folks just some kind of updated information. So currently there are now at the end of October, or excuse me, the 1st of October, there's 959 students that are enrolled at the technical school. A huge, huge increase. We have 78 of those students, and out of our allocation of 95. If you recall, all the 11 districts get basically an equal share, and everyone gets 95 spaces, and so we're utilizing 78. Others are down as low as 54. Others are as high as 134. So again, as the spaces are allocated, if they're not used, the other districts are able to take those spots, and that's how there's some range and variation between the allocation within the students. So just some quick reporting on my end, and that's all I have, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Morvay. The chair recognizes Dr. Andy Pushak for a Northwest Intermediate Unit report.
Thank you, Mr. President. In addition to the board report that I send out after each meeting, in your folder today I've included the annual report. School code requires each IU to publish and produce and disseminate an annual report. You will see that in your folder, as well as a one-pager that they're calling Fast Facts. So that is all for my report, and if I could mention to Mr. Morvay that the heavy equipment day was not your normal heavy equipment day. My son and I went there. Not only could you get up in the trucks and honk the horns, they allowed the boys and girls to get into these huge machines and they were digging holes out back. I'm talking 8-foot, 10-foot, huge holes. They allowed them to dig them, fill them back in. The owner of the equipment stood right by, let the children climb up in there, showed them how to use the machine. So hopefully we're encouraging a lot of heavy equipment operators that will be in the future. So that was very, very interesting. So thank you for that, and that concludes my IU report.
Thank you, Dr. Pushak. That brings us to board correspondence and dialogue. Anything from the board this evening?
Mr. President, again, I want to say 46-year career for Mr. Gifford is quite impressive. And tonight, I do see two of our winter coaches in attendance at least, so I want to say good luck to the newly hired wrestling coaches that are with us in attendance tonight. And, you know, if you guys can match Mr. Gifford's 46-year tenure, you know, our wrestling program will come back to where it once was.
Thank you, Mr. Brumbagen. We'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Pushak.
Nicole, second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. We are adjourned.